Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Team Comp Tuesday, the series where every Tuesday we take a look at a different team in Genshin Impact. This week for you I have a Cyno Bloom or Hyperbloom team. I realized I never had actually made a video for this at the time of the Cyno video, and I also never kind of made an update on Cyno post Nahida, I believe. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be doing a Cyno team. Cyno is the character that I play from time to time. I tend to stick to my Zhao and Hu Tao generally, and then in open world I kind of just use whatever new character I just pull. But I do quite like Cyno. I like his design, I like his gameplay, and this is another option, solid team option for him that can free up different units for other teams compared to the standard Cyno Hyper Carry team. I think I kind of prefer Hyper Carry team a little bit more, but this team definitely can have its advantages and can be just as good. So let's get into it. Okay, so just briefly, let's just go over some of the basics about this team. So very quickly, obviously, as is a Hyper Bloom team, we first need to trigger a Bloom reaction and then trigger a Electro hit on the cores. So Cyno has really big AoE hits, so very easy to hit the cores. But you may be wondering, won't Cyno do less damage if we have to build him to hit the cores? Well, this is where Nahida, in particular, actually brings this team up to another level, because Nahida's skills share elemental mastery, a max of 250, I believe, from her ultimate. Yes, a max of a bonus 250 from her ultimate. So this means your Cyno can actually reach, 500, 600 EM without actually having to be spec'd for elemental mastery, and even more if you were to say opt for elemental mastery sets instead of Thundering Fury. So if you have a very good Gilded Dream set, I would run it on your Cyno here, as this would give him quite a bit more elemental mastery. And because he has elemental mastery 2 damage scaling, it's not that big of a deal for you to run an elemental mastery base set. I just prefer hyper carry, so that's why I have decided to hyper invest into Thundering Fury set. But basically your Cyno will be able to reach somewhere in the range of 600 EM relatively easily, meaning that even when he's triggering the cores, he'll still be doing quite a bit of damage while still getting full value from his personal damage, while also being able to get the extra damage from Jingqiu. So it basically costs you nothing to run Jingqiu in this slot. The only thing it kind of costs you is the lack of a shielder, meaning you might have to pay a little bit better, or a little bit more safe, but it's not that big of a deal, and especially due to the interruption resistance, the ability to run an actual healer, something that is not present on most normal Cyno aggravate teams. It's about the same in survivability, personally, from my experience. Alright, now it's time to go over builds, so we're going to start with the main on-field driver of the team, Cyno. Weapons. I have a Staff of Scarlet Sands, his signature weapon. This is obviously very good for his team. Any 5-star weapon works here. Homa, Jade Spear, perfectly fine. You don't actually want to use Catch. Actually, yeah, no. This might work, but I personally would stay away from it. I would opt for like a death match if you have it, or a Black Cliff pull is kind of the direction I would go. For this team, there's the possibility that something like Dragon's Bane would be okay. it wouldn't be as good for his personal damage, but triggering the cores, it would make the cores triggering a little bit better. Missive Wind Spear, if you actually have it from the event, is also a pretty good option for Cyno, but I would highly recommend Blackcliff or Deathmatch, something along those lines. Liftic actually could also be okay, but not really, since we don't have enough characters on the team to trigger it, so I would stick to one of the previously mentioned weapons. And then for artifact sets, for this team in particular, I would recommend a Gilded Dreams set if you have one. That is good stats. I do not really have a good standard DPS Gilded Dreams sets. I really only have an EM Gilded Dreams sets. So I will be rocking Thundering Fury, especially because I prefer the Thundering Fury can be a little bit better in some of his other teams. So, but it is perfectly usable in this team, as you will be getting damage increases on your Hyperblooms. Oh, actually, there's another set as well. You could also theoretically run the this new set here that makes Hyperbloom do more damage if you want to, but since Cyno's damage is mainly coming from his personal damage, I would recommend that only as like the third option. Now for stats, you will go for crit rate or crit damage on the circlet, electro damage on the goblet, and then elemental mastery on the sands. You could go for attack, but specifically in this team, elemental mastery is quite a bit better, so I would try to get an elemental mastery sands if you can, and just in general, it tends to be very good for Cyno, since even in his standard aggravate hyper carry teams, EM is still quite good for him. This is due to the fact that he has a passive right here, where his elemental mastery actually gives damage bonuses to the rest of his kit. This is not worth building full elemental mastery on him generally for, but this does make any elemental mastery substats you pick up and elemental mastery sands a bit better. For skills, you really only need to level E and burst. This is again due to him having the property where his damage numbers are inside of his burst skill, or his modifiers are inside of his burst skill, meaning that they don't actually bother using his normal attack at all, so you don't have to level at all if you do not want to. Alright, and next up is our Hydro character of choice. Xingqiu is the best for this team, and it's actually not super close. This is mainly due to the fact that because you don't have a shielder, the interruption resistance and the damage reduction from rain swords is actually a pretty significant difference compared to Yelan, who would be the standard kind of replacement for Xingqiu. Sack Sword as the weapon of choice, as always. If you don't have it, any other energy recharge sword is perfectly usable, but Sack Sword is the best, and this is kind of the weapon that is tailor-made for him. So I would recommend getting it if you can. Artifact sets, ideally here, you want to run him on a 4-piece emblem of the Severed Fate sets. This is just because in general he's going to have relatively high energy recharge. He wants energy recharge, and the burst damage bonus from emblem would be quite good for him. There are 2-piece options, like for example I'm using 2-piece Noblesse, 2-piece Art Depths. This is mainly due to the fact that I just have good substats on this stuff, so at your discretion, but ideally you want 4-piece emblem. For stats, crit rate or crit damage on circlet, hydro damage on goblet, and then energy recharge or attack on the sands. You can generally get away with an attack sands if you have about 200 energy recharge, but I personally prefer to have more energy recharge than required, just to make rotations smoother and make things a lot more comfy. For talents, level up E and level up burst. You don't need a level Pizzato attack whatsoever. Burst is more important, as it's where most of his damage and hydro application comes from, but it is worthwhile to level up the E to pretty high levels due to the damage reduction ratio, which is a super underrated part of Xingqiu's kit. The fact that he gives you damage reduction means that he just makes your on-field character a lot tankier. Alright, next up, let's talk about Nahida. Um, there is one slight nuance to Nahida's build in this team, and this is that depending on what you build on Kuki, affects kind of how you need to build Nahida. What I mean by that is that if you decide to go full Elemental Mastery on Kuki, which we'll talk a little bit more about whenever we get to the Kuki section in the next section, then you can focus more on a damage build for Nahida. But if not, you need to focus more on an Elemental Mastery build for Nahida so that you get the max amount of shared Elemental Mastery to Cyno, so you get them Hyperblooms nice and high. I think mine were doing somewhere in the realm of like 25k damage, which is still a very respectable Hyperbloom for being built as a full DPS character. Weapons, Sac Frags is the way to go personally. I like it. It's got good Elemental Mastery substat, and the cooldown isn't really relevant, but good Elemental Mastery substat is always welcome. Favonius Codex is another solid option if you need the energy recharge, and the particles are nice for Cyno. Never underestimate the value of Favonius weapons in teams, especially for energy hungry characters like Cyno present. Mapamare is an okay option as free to play just because it has an Elemental Mastery substat, but the problem is it has a low Elemental Mastery substat, so it's never really that high. So I would try to get your hands on a Sac Frags or a Favonius Codex if humanly possible. Artifact sets, Deepwood Memories, as always, generally the go-to on Nahida, as it just buffs her own damage the most. For stats, prioritize crit rate or crit damage on Circlet or Elemental Mastery. Goblet is either Dendro or Elemental Mastery, and Sands will be Elemental Mastery. In general, I prefer to have her built basically as just kind of a generic unit, so Elemental Mastery, and then some crit here with a decent Elemental Mastery substat is kind of where I am. And just some okay ratios overall. 55, 120, not too bad, with like almost 800 Elemental Mastery. This is kind of just a generalist Nahida build. If you want to spec her a bit more for this team, you can drop a lot of her Elemental Mastery if you're going to run Elemental Mastery on Kuki, and you can build stuff like crit and damage percent if you really wanted to. But this is just how I have mine set up, so I never really have to bother swapping anything around personally. Alright, let's move on to Kuki. Oh, I forgot to mention the last section. E and Burst only for Nahida is really all you need. But anyway, let's talk about Kuki. As I was mentioning a little bit in the Nahida section, there are two directions you can take Kuki. You can either build full EM on Kuki or build for full heals. Now, why would you build for full EM if the goal is to have Cyno trigger the seeds? Well, it's because he won't always trigger the seeds. And because Kuki scales well with Elemental Mastery for healing anyway, and this lets Nahida build more towards damage if you want to, this is not a bad idea. Also, just if you're like me and you're too lazy to swap your Kuki build, this is not a awful option either. So I'm first going to talk about the EM focused Kuki, and then I'll go over a build for the healing focused Kuki. So for the EM focused Kuki, Iron Sting is your weapon of choice. It's just a good option. I think if you have it, Freedom Sworn could be okay here, but just in general, Iron Sting is the way to go. Artifacts, Gilded Dream sets with Elemental Mastery, Elemental Mastery, Elemental Mastery is the way to go. And talents, E is really the only skill you care about, as it gives you your HP healing, and that is what you want. You can level the burst if you want, but you're not really going to get that much damage from it. Now let's talk briefly about why Kuki is good on this team. Kuki's good on this team because you would like a healer. Xingqiu is not really enough healing for Cyno by himself. Really, the only Cyno teams that get away without a healer are ones that use Zhongli, just because the shield is borderline unbreakable, so it just gives enough defenses that you don't need to worry about it. But for the most part, in a team like this, Xingqiu's healing by itself will not be enough for a character like Cyno, unless you're dodging a lot. But if you're dodging a lot on Cyno, you're losing DPS uptime, so you're better off just running a healer. Kuki's good because second Electro is good for Cyno. Cynos is a burst-focused character with a relatively high-cost burst, and you don't want to stack a lot of energy recharge on him, so having a second Electro character to help battery for him is great. So now let's talk really quickly about what a healing-focused Kuki would look like. So for a healing-focused Kuki, I would go Favonius Sword. You could go I think there's the Key Sword has HP on it, the 5-star, if you really wanted to, but again, talking about Cyno needing energy, I think Favonius Sword would be the way to go there. And then for artifact set, you would swap the Gilded Dream set here out for a Tenacity of the Millilith set, and you would go something like HP healing percent or HP crit rate to proc your Favonius. If you have enough crit rate substats, you can get away without it, but in general, you're probably going to need to go HP crit rate. And same talent priority, you mainly caring about the E. Alright, now we're going to go over a rough rotations showcase. The rotation for this is very similar to a lot of other Hyperbloom teams, although due to Cyno being on field, you do have to mix in Cyno's rotation, which Cyno's rotation is generally E into burst, into 4 autos, E, 5 autos, E, 5 autos, E, 4 autos, E, 5E, 5E swap. Sorry, 5 skill. Every time I said E, I meant skill, but we'll just go for a little showcase. Generally, I would lead with Nahida stuff because it's the longest. Cyno E, burst, 4 for the double hit, and then we're waiting out the spear attack to get the eye. Then we're waiting out the eye again. Wait out the eye again. And yeah, you're basically just rotating through. Whenever Rain Swords drops, you actually can swap off to try to start battering back up your burst on Cyno, because there will be a little bit of downtime due to Cyno's burst having a base duration here of 10, but it actually gets increased whenever you hit certain skills. Yeah, so whenever you hit skills, it can go up to 18, and it's pretty easy to get this up to 18, but generally after Rain Swords drop is when you want to swap off and start worrying about getting your other characters up and running. The rotation does slightly change if you are not using a Thundering Fury set. If you're not using a Thundering Fury set, I would basically just auto attack until you see the eye every time. But when you have Thundering Fury, you're basically allowed to squeeze an extra 2 or 3 E's inside of a rotation. Ideally, you want to go through all 5 hits of the auto attack string when possible, because that last big hit where you chuck the spear at the ground, it does the most damage. But in the case that you want to squeeze some extra E's in there to get the bonus E damage, you kind of have to end up doing like 3 hits into E's to get the extra ones in. Alright everybody, and that's going to be the end of this week's episode of Team Comp Tuesday. I want to thank you for coming out. I wish you luck if you're rolling on any of the banners coming up. We will probably have another video coming out next week relative to the banners. I already did an Ayaka video a long time ago, so I probably won't retread Ayaka, but maybe we'll do like a freeze team that doesn't have a 5-star in it, or maybe I don't have Shenhe, and I don't really intend on rolling for her, and Shenhe's basically literally just slots into teams. She doesn't really open up her own teams, so we might be doing something a little bit weird or even possibly unrelated to the banners next week. But thank you for coming out. I hope you had a great day. Let me know if you give this team a try, if you enjoy it, or whatnot. And I will see you in the next one.